wherever we are, the common thread for all of us is we are people of African descent, which is a beautiful thing to pause and think about. Um, the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities is a systems transformation organization. I'll give you a bit of background in a moment, but we're really excited to be in relationship with, you know, CS Innovation in South Africa and Canada at the Nelson Mandela University in trying to really go to places where us, at least here in North America, have not been able to go to, which is places of courage and discovery, to be able to ask really the important questions about what does it mean to really do the work that we do from an African ways of knowing, from Afrocentricity, from embedding the various Afrocentric values to the work that we do. As a systems transformation organization, we have always asked, what does it mean to actually, for us to push internally among ourselves, but also with all stakeholders, governments and funders, philanthropy, and so on, to have conversations of courage about our current state of being, our predicament, if you want, yeah? And to be able to do that, I think, at the core of every exercise that we do in systems transformation, learning and exchange as we're doing today is critically important. That's why I think I want people to pause and think about why this exercise, why this engagement, why these conversations are important. Because commonsensically, as it sounds, there's no systems transformation without learning from one another. And that's what we're trying to do today, specifically with the lens of, if you want today, of youth agency. The Network for the Advancement of Black Communities was created as if you want, as a confluence of quite strong interest in the Black community here in the province of Ontario, in collaboration with the Ontario government, in collaboration with a university called York University here that hosted us for the first 2-3 years of our existence, and became quickly, as a national entity, recognized in the value add that we bring by federal governments, philanthropy, and others. And what we have been doing as an organization is exclusively focus on systems transformation. Last week, I was talking to a sister, and she asked, what do you guys do? I said, we focus on systems transformation. And quickly she said, English, please. What do you mean by that? And so by systems transformation, is like when you take education, when you take, housing, when you take health, any of these isms, usually the social determinants of health, they interact with our communities, children, youth, families, our elders and seniors, every segment of our society here in Canada and elsewhere, in ways sometimes that we don't have control of. Yeah? We're impacted with the receiving end. What we're trying to do through knowledge mobilization, through data and research, through government relations and public policy, through service coordination, through network weaving, through evaluation capacity building, through smart grant making, what we're trying to do is create different conditions that hopefully will lead to medium to long-term change. For example, around the area of housing at the moment, we've been working across Canada with communities in many cities and leaders, guided by a national advisory committee, working with Canada Mortgage Housing, working with government of Nova Scotia to incubate the first ever national Black Canadian Housing Technical Resource Center. This is a field catalyst that's going to help Black communities across the country to really tackle the systems issue around housing. We've been supporting, for example, a Black focused community health center here in Toronto called Taibu Community Health Center, in really creating leadership and space around the area of Black mental health, in terms of really supporting their knowledge mobilization practices and other activities that they are doing. So in essence, we're agnostic to issue, whatever the issue is, as long as the issue is tackling a systems challenge for Black communities. What we're bringing there is the toolbox and the machinery of systems transformation. So actually, I think we've been really, really excited to do this work over the last 6 years now. We're heading towards our 6th year. And I'm so pleased with my colleagues like Alan and Denise and Jonathan and Nafisa and Rosemary and Sarah and Rochelle Faith uh, and others that we're working with, we are there to actually create the conditions through knowledge mobilization, network weaving, government relations, public policy evaluation, all those things that I mentioned. We sometimes refer to this as the strategic pillars. Today, what we're doing is we're doing a bit of network weaving, a bit of convening in collaboration with CS Innovation and Conrad. So we're extremely pleased about this relationship that we have forged, because what it does for us, it opens new windows of learning and exchange. So this is the first time with intention we're exploring collectively with others. That's the other thing about systems transformation. It's not singular activity. It's collective endeavor. This area of Afrocentricity and systems transformation. The other important thing for us as NAPS is to be able to really challenge ourselves. There are two maxims that guide our work. Systems transformation is not a matter of individual leaders, individual organizations, governments. It's a collective endeavor. So one of the things that we're aspiring in doing is creating an architecture of engagement that brings governments, philanthropy, community leaders, all segments of our community to have conversations of consequence based on data and evidence. Yeah. And so in order to do that, we developed what's called the Black ecosystem approach. We have identified 10 different paradigm shifts. And some of those, for example, have to do with moving our relationship among ourselves and with all the stakeholders that I mentioned, from transactions to transformation. Another important aspect of this paradigm shift is moving away from heroic leadership models to collective and servant leadership models. Another important aspect is succession planning, is ensuring that our young leaders are really nurtured, support with a lens to talent, retention, and development, and moving away from simply, a bunch of us in my generation delivering, if you want, results.
Recording in progress.
And moving away from saying, like, we need our young leaders in the front. That's why today's conversation is critically important. So I'm really pleased about the relationship and really excited about the first discussion that we have through the stewardship and facilitation of our sister Nazarene and our partners in South Africa. I will pause here in terms of my intervention. I think later on I'll listen with a lot of interest today. Later on I'll share my reflections and make reference to some of the work that we have done with young leaders ourselves, recognizing youth agency. So I wanted to now invite maybe Professor Becky to also share his opening remarks. And we're really excited about the collaboration that we have with Professor Becky at Conrad. And we're learning a lot about the work that our brothers and sisters are doing in South Africa. And we're excited about the possibilities that are emerging through their leadership and presence, creating all those connecting dots in the continent and the diaspora. So back to you, Nazarene, and welcome again, my brother, Professor Becky.
Fantastic work with the representative from Conrad, who's going to come on shortly. Remember that we are streaming live on YouTube as well as Facebook, if I'm correct in saying that. Yes. And please, if you are active on Twitter, then join the conversation on Twitter. Go to our chat. And for those who are joining via the live stream, follow and mention us on Twitter, X as it's known. Elon Musk is very thorough about calling it X, at Afro Systems Talk. It is in the chat. So that's AFRO Systems with a S, Talk. Follow them, Afro Systems Talk, mention and give your thoughts so we can pick that up and throw it into the conversation as we get into the breakout rooms. Now, to help us welcome our special keynote guest, I'd like to invite Professor Becky Temba Mngumezulu, heading Conrad, who is from the Nelson Mandela University, to help us do the welcome. Professor Becky.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
All good.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm also appreciative of the fact that my colleague Aman has outlined what we've been doing since we forged the relations with NAPS, which is a very fruitful relationship. And in the same token, I would also like to thank Mr. Neil Kempfer, who has been the link person between us at Nelson Mandela University and Conrad in particular, with our colleagues in Canada and other colleagues across the continent and in the diaspora. So this is very appreciative, and we really thank you for all the hard work that we've been doing. I'll be doing this welcoming on behalf of my boss, that is Professor Sibongile Mutwa. I would say that, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our Vice Chancellor here at Nelson Mandela University, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, and her executive, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to the organizers of this session. In particular, the sterling work done by Mr. Neil Kempfer and Aman, who is the Director of Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, NAPSI, is commendable. The Vice Chancellor was looking forward to this event. Unfortunately, she's currently held up in a council meeting. She was hoping that the meeting would finish on time to allow her to be part of this session. Unfortunately, this did not happen. However, she's here with us in spirit, and she wishes you well as you deliberate on very pertinent issues. We appreciate the good working relationship with our, which is our university is basically establishing or is established with the NAPSI through the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy, shortened version is CANRAD, which I have a privilege to lead. Through this partnership, our university has footprints which transcend our geographical borders. In the South African context, today's event happens at an opportune moment. June is known as the Youth Month in the South African calendar. Therefore, the Vice Chancellor is excited about today's deliberations, which focus primarily on the youth who are the future of South Africa, the African continent, and the globe at large. Most importantly, as the university, we are delighted to have our Chancellor, Dr. Fraser Geraldine Mleketi, who is the keynote speaker for today's event. We are really grateful for that opportunity. And on behalf of Professor Mutwa, Nelson Mandela University wishes you all the best as you deliberate on very pertinent issues. And from CANRAD in particular, we are excited and we look forward to listening to all the speakers who will be deliberating on these issues, most importantly because it focuses on the youth. In the South African context, we've been talking about the need for an intergenerational mix, whereby the old and the young come together to take the continent forward and then take Africans in the diaspora forward. So if you afford the youth an opportunity to address us, that is appreciated, because then it means that when those of us who are old hand over the baton, then the continent and the globe will move on smoothly. With those few words, thank you very much, colleagues. I look forward to deliberations. Thank you.
Professor Becky, much appreciated as the Executive Director at CANRAD. I know you have done a pre-introduction to our keynote speaker, Dr. Geraldine Fraser Moleketi, Chancellor at the Nelson Mandela University and Chairman of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. Today, we'll be addressing us about youth and transformation change, lessons from the past. What can we say about this inspirational figure and pillar in our lives moving forward as a figure? Geraldine Jocelyn Fraser Moleketi is the Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University, Chairman of the Thabo Mbeki Board of Trustees. She serves as Lead Independent Director and Board Member of Zaro, Non-Exec Board Member of Standard Bank, and Chairman of the Tiger Brands Board. Previously, she held key roles at the African Development Bank and the UNDP and served as a minister in South Africa's first democratic government. She played a vital role in the ANC's 1994 election preparations and served in Parliament until 2008. Geraldine is a fellow of Harvard University's Institute of Politics, has studied at Wharton Business School, and holds a master's degree in public administration from the University of Pretoria. She has received numerous awards, including honorary doctorates from Nelson Mandela University, Northwest University, and was named 2016 New African Woman of the Year by New African Magazine. And it is our pleasure to be listening to you today. Welcome, Dr. Frazier Moleketi.
Good afternoon, good morning, and let me greet you in whatever the timeline is that you are in, wherever you are listening to this. I will stand on the salutations of those who have spoken before me, in particular taking into account the particular focus by Emmanuel when he made a reference to the recognitions of the First Nations people. I think it's just appropriate when we talk about ourselves as Africans and Africans in the diaspora, that we take into account the various acknowledgements that could be and should be considered. I mean, it's very interesting, and this is before I go into my intervention. I'd like to just raise the fact that on the South African coat of arms, there is our own dying language, and that's that of the Khoi and San people, and we referred to it at the time as you know, probably not the correct word term, but we saw it as a way in which in Europe they may recognize Latin or otherwise, and it in essence talks about the unity of our people and our unity in diversity. So as we speak this afternoon, we are also speaking about the unity of Black peoples across the world in their complete diversity, and acknowledging the indigenous peoples in every part of the world in which we find ourselves. So having made that point, I'd like to start out by saying that your choice of month to have a speaker from South Africa is quite interesting in terms of your topic, because June is considered Youth Month in South Africa. And it's Youth Month because it's also the anniversary of the June 16 uprising by youth in South Africa, the Soweto uprising. So I found it almost fortuitous when I looked at choice of month. So as we look at the whole issue of the comprehensive focus on systems and systems transformation, I thought that I'd deal with it from a political perspective. And bear with me. And this is, after all, because I spent most of my youth and part of my adult years in the political arena, and I will be reflecting on this a bit as well. I'm also going to challenge you by being provocative around some of the issues that youth are engaging on around the issue of solidarity, in particular because the question of the way forward will come up. And I think when we, and as we recognize youth agency as being a critical ingredient for systems transformation, and accepting that this is not linear in any way, as has been indicated, we should also then be ready to look at those ecosystems and be willing to challenge them. So bear with me this afternoon as I do so. So in reflecting on stories of youth agency, I saw June and June 16 Soweto Youth Uprising as one such, because it profoundly changed the socio-political landscape in South Africa. But we should bear in mind that youth is transient, and that what is critical, and it's been raised earlier today, is the importance of an intergenerational mix as we deal with the complexities before us. So just as we talk about the profound change of the socio-political landscape in South Africa in 1976, we can talk about different moments. But let me reflect on this a little bit. The role of South African students through the South African Student Movement, SASM, the Black Consciousness Movement that was known as BCM, the African National Congress of South Africa, the ANC, and the Pan-African Congress of Azania, the PAC, they were involved directly in contributing to this particular moment in history. And as we look at this moment and the revolt that took place, it has been described, and I'd like to quote, that the events in what has become known as the Soweto Revolt are not isolated happenings. They have their roots in the crisis which had been building up at every level of socio-economic structure. The intensity of the Soweto events reflects the developments over the years of the people's reactions to the growing crisis of apartheid. At the political level, unbroken efforts by our party and the whole liberation movement, headed by the ANC, maintained the spirit of resistance and helped lay the foundation for the growth of a heightened revolutionary mood, which is in evidence. And amongst large numbers of the new militants thrown up by activities, there's growing awareness of liberating ideas and a search for the correct politics of social revolution, close quotes. I raise that because at the end of the day, as we reflect on changing of systems, we should bear in mind that this is in many instances rooted in socioeconomic conditions of society. And as we deal with social issues, quite correctly so, we do so in a way that will be sustainable and also deal with the root causes. So although, and I'm stepping back to 76, Soweto was undoubtedly the epicenter of the 1976 uprising, the brutal response by police to the students' peaceful march ignited a general revolt across South Africa at the time. After June 16, one township after another engaged in open revolt. It took only one day for students from a different township in the then Transvaal to engage, to organize solidarity actions with their comrades in Soweto. In the Western Cape, it took root on the 11th of August 1976 and spread across high schools in the Western Cape. And I want to very consciously identify the fact that this was across Black and brown high schools. I mentioned the Western Cape as well because I was born in the Western Cape, and you see that on my profile. And it so happened that on the 11th of August 1976, my sister and I were traveling back from a meeting of an organization that was called the South Peninsula Educational Fellowship.
were in the middle of your presentation. We're talking around Youth Month and
No, I know
solidarity.
exactly. Yes, I know exactly where I was. And
So
I
that's
think
great.
we should all prepare ourselves. I mean, sometimes when you engage in a program as comprehensive as this and as far-reaching as this one, you're bound to get those who will be in opposition and will use everything by all means. And as in our past, and we will in our present and in our future, we won't get deterred. So this will happen. I know people have said that Zoom is prone to hacking. It's the first time I've experienced it, but yeah, I hope the exploitation of Black people will stop at some point, as the exploitation of all people for nefarious reasons. I will then move off the example I was going into on the 11th of August of 1976, but rather want to touch a little bit on the question of thought leadership. And in terms of thought leadership, thinking back to when we were much younger, and I joked with Neil Camphor and said, fancy you choosing someone who's now in her 60s, who was 16 years old in 76, to speak on this particular issue. I found that I had a chuckle about it, let's put it that way, but we are having the intergenerational bit coming up later. So in terms of thought leadership, what we immersed ourselves in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, and 80s was what was referred to at that particular point as Black conscious literature, and particularly looking at the works of the likes of Frantz Fanon, Kwame Nkrumah, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Malcolm X, Wally Serote, who was actually the national poet laureate in South Africa at the moment, and various others. And the interesting thing is, if you look at their works, it is still pertinent and relevant today. In the late 70s and beginning of 1980, we also looked at community work through the lens of Paulo Freire's Pedagogics of the Oppressed. And this was part of our building of community organizations and looking at how we would engage with communities around adult literacy programs, engaging and working very closely with the labor movement, supporting as students from the University of the Western Cape, which is where I was studying at the time. And mind you, Alan Busak Jr.'s father played quite a significant role in the 70s and 80s, and even much later. But we saw this as a turning point in the lives of many young people. And I'd want to probably in the next 5 or 8 minutes take this back in time, but also forward to the fact that in 1979, 1980, and in particular, there was a movement around the Free Nelson Mandela itself, and that particular movement, and now I'm chancellor at the university that draws its name from this iconic leader, Nelson Mandela, where we then printed his doc speech of 20 April 1964. And this doc speech was banned in South Africa at that point. I mean, it's quite bizarre. So he appeared in court. he made this 3-hour seminal speech that was referred to as the I am prepared to die speech. And it ended, and I want to draw on those words. It ended with the words, I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, and here he was referring to the judge, if it needs to be, it's an ideal which I'm prepared to die, for which I am prepared to die, close quotes. And here is a man who would, decades later, become the first president of a democratic South Africa. And he was involved in the liberation movement from his youth. And that, so I think it speaks to the fact that we need to look very deliberately at what we engage in, how we engage in it, what informs us, and what are the materials we draw from, what are the practices that we draw on, and how do we build wherever we are in communities and beyond. Now, I can go into a lot more, but I will leave that for the discussion and question and answer time. But let me fast forward. So from the 70s and 80s, when I was in my late teens and turned 20, I also went into exile and was in exile for 1 month, short of 10 years. And returned to South Africa, and at the age of 30 was involved in what's referred to as the CODESA talks. And I was there as a member of the liberation movement and in the management committee. And this required a lot of very clear thinking and understanding, deep reading, but also engagement with communities in order that we never be removed from the communities that we hailed from, that we're always able to represent constituencies. And hence, I want to draw on the preamble of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, the Constitution of 1996. And the preamble, this constitution, mind you, was a constitution that was crafted by founding parents, not founding fathers. Founding parents, men and women, were involved in it. And the preamble says, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustice of our past, honor those who suffered justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. And so it goes on. I thought that it was necessary to reflect on that and capture that as we speak to the issue of voice, presence, and action of youth, and know that it's important as youth engage in very concrete and tangible projects, they also remember the importance of solidarity. And we see this where intergenerationally, there's the involvement now of student movements across the globe and these movements are growing, whether it's South Africa, Brazil, Chile, and elsewhere across the world, where they're organizing, students are helping to build huge support for the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice, and equality amongst an entire generation of young people. And it's important to raise that because we come back to the African continent and we say we can't talk about our struggles without acknowledging that struggle. And it's one that has actually brought together, shall I call it, the orthodoxy and governments who also opposed our own struggle and worked actively against it, who are again finding themselves on the wrong side. For Africa, our solidarity and cutting our teeth through engagement in these struggles intergenerationally, we must remember the people of the Sudan, of South Sudan, of the DRC, of Ethiopia, and Eritrea. And so we can go on elsewhere on the continent. We look at the role of the youth in West Africa, and they're saying we're not going to continue patterns of what has been associated with colonization and so on. And to a large extent also saying that a continent that should have a demographic dividend through its youth, we need to look at how we make this tangible. And we should do so through the various institutions on the continent, but also through the solidarity of those in the diaspora and beyond. But I can talk forever and go on forever, Nazreen, and maybe I should stop at this point and come back to questions. And that regrettable interlude has sort of caused a bit of sidetracking on the personal stories I would otherwise have gone into, but that engagement we can have even during the panel of, I don't know whether you called it the elders, as it comes up later. Thank you very much.
The elders' reflection indeed, Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi. Thank you for your wonderful grace in accepting and understanding the dynamics of how these sessions can work, particularly the online conferencing. And yes, Zoom has had that problem. They have promised us the high security, but as we know, AI has brought a new sense of cybersecurity. You talked about youth agency, and it has such an interesting dynamic in the world that we currently live in. You framed it so well in terms of being Youth Month, where we have a heightened sense of how youth understand, respond, or react to things happening around them. And the enabling tool for that is technology. We experienced one version of it right now on this call, but right now around the world and on the continent particularly, we see, and to the many points, really interesting narrative that you brought around how youth are responding to things, not particularly reacting, but using technology and social media as a way to craft not only a narrative, but to provide a response to things, and particularly the ruling powers that may have one perspective and now have to understand youth agency using technology. There's an interesting conversation to go through, which we'll go through in the village conversations. We have a few minutes. I would like to ask if there are any questions at this point. Please drop them into the chat. If you are tuning in via YouTube or Facebook, don't hesitate to post your questions in the comments. They will be picked up by our technical team. Just also to go to our sponsors at this point. This session is put together by our partners, Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, Ontario Trillium Foundation, Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy at NMU, and CS Business Innovations. We've got quite a diverse and wonderful audience joining us from across the world, including South Africa. So whether you're in the morning or heading into the evening like us, we welcome you and we look forward to your questions. I want to check with the technical team if there are questions, Dr. Geraldine, at this point. We don't seem to have any. Just final thought from you around, or opening thought, perhaps, not a final thought, an opening thought going into the village conversations, which are happening next with an incredible group of people. They are going to be addressing how would you see African value systems and principles as critical to your work? What would be an opening thought that you'd like to consider in that conversation?
On. And one that's very commonly known in South Africa is one of Ubuntu. you know, I am a person because of other people. I am simply told it could be seen as no person is an island, entire unto themselves. You know, we all part of the main, and that's what we should see. A second thought that I'd like to leave, and this was a principle that we used in the public service, and that was even just before my term as Minister for Public Service and Administration in South Africa, was the whole concept, and I call it a principle, it's a value, the concept of Batupile, people first. So when you are in public service, and here I talk about government, whichever level, whether you are there at local level, provincial, or I think you will call it state in North America and maybe Europe, or federal level, in our instance, national level, you've got to see yourself as serving people. And the people must come first. The citizen must come first. And I think to a large extent, that's a value that tends to get lost because we get so preoccupied with the me, I, and my that we forget the we and the service. We forget the value of Ubuntu. And this goes back to anywhere on the continent. And look, as we deal with these value systems, you know, there's another African idiom that says, if you want to go fast, walk alone. If you want to walk with people, it may be slower. I don't see it in terms of speed, but I see it in terms of sustainability. Because right now, time is not on our side on the continent, not for our youth, not for the beautiful ones yet to be born, not for our past. We need to draw on the positive in our past, and there are many. I mean, you can talk about Mali and Timbuktu and what that era represented and how colonization disrupted that, and say, how are we able to use technology? How are we able to use this youth dividend by building skill sets and education and bring Ubuntu into play, bring Batupile into play, bring sustainability into play, where we're able to teach the globe on the positives from the continent. And there's many positives. And even in the area of AI, we can teach the world a few things. Thank you.
Using artificial intelligence, which all the major players, Google, Meta, Amazon, are in the race to understand that. And you talk particularly in the context of it being an African focus. We are grappling with these tech companies to understand their Eurocentric focus. A conversation for another day. But before you step back and we take a little break before we go into the village conversation, a question from Prof. Mngomezulu to you, Dr. Geraldine. After 30 years of freedom in South Africa, to what extent have the dream of the youth of 1976 been realized? Is the South African youth closer to other youths elsewhere in the globe?
You know, I'm going to draw on a philosopher who says, you know, you can have the pessimism of the intellect or the optimism of will. And I'm sure many of you may recognize that particular philosopher. And to a large extent say that 30 years ago, the youth at the time may not have been quite clear on what South Africa in 2024 would look like. But what they were clear on is what came through the Constitution of 1996. We have not achieved that constitution, and it's not going to help if any of us fall into any form of pessimism. We've got to look at how do we ensure the realization of this constitution, and in particular the socioeconomic rights and the political rights and freedoms in this constitution. We've achieved the political side, and some would argue that this past election was quite telling and a wake-up call to all political parties, because there were more young people and people who abstained from voting than those who had voted and brought in the the governing party through a minority vote of 40%. I mean, 42% of the electorate abstained. And that is a big challenge. And we can't have that apathy. The numbers that we've seen turn out in South Africa is what's considered a norm in the developed world. We never wanted to become a norm in South Africa, and we need to go back to the drawing board and see what is to be done. So that's the big question. So it's not about the unrealized dream or the dream deferred. It's how do we ensure that we make that a reality? And that's the intergenerational mission.
How do we make that a reality indeed? You bring to my mind that there needs to be a focus, or it highlights the focus of what responsibility and accountability mean, even if it's from a youth agency perspective, which we will investigate and explore more in our village conversations. We thank you very much for the keynote address. We honor you for your service to our country and for continuing to inspire us and people who are driving the youth agenda in this new incredible world of artificial intelligence, which is certainly a driving force for everything that we're doing these days. We thank you so much, Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Monkesi. Now, if you've joined us, you are either watching live on this call on Zoom, you're tuning in via YouTube or Facebook, and you're dropping us questions in the comment section wherever you're streaming live from. We have quite a few partners, and we'd like to thank all our partners who put this particular session together. CANRAD, NAPSI, we've got, of course, we've mentioned CANRAD, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and CS Business Innovations. We're going to have a short break of 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 5:05, and then go into our village conversations with our esteemed guests. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be in the world, welcome back. You are joining the second dialogue, I was going to say dialogue 2, focusing on recognizing youth agency as a critical ingredient for systems transformation, Afrocentric perspectives, lessons, and practice. I'm Nazreen Ibrahim, the moderator of this session. We have quite a comprehensive dialogue seminar session today. They consisted of various parts. We had an introduction by quite a few of our associates and partners, CANRAD, NABC, CS Business Solutions, as well as Ontario Trillium Foundation. You've listened, if you've come back and you were on the call, to a keynote by Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, Chancellor at the Nelson Mandela University and Chairman of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. We've been focusing on the varying aspects of what youth agency may mean as an introductory list of notes. That's what the keynote provided. Going into now what will be our village conversation, to give you a sense of what we are doing. We will have the village conversation, which will be an hour with 4 very interesting young people who are fostering and understanding change in the world daily, to understand identity, youth development, and giving hope to people. We will then go into elders reflection, talking about the village conversations, have a break, and then come back for breakout group discussions, reflections, and we will close out at around 7 p.m. South African time. Now, let's go back into our village conversations. And before we do, I seem to be going into my background, so excuse that if some parts of me seem to be missing at this moment. If you are tuning in via Facebook or YouTube, you can drop your questions into the comments or just thoughts, and we will be sure to address them as we go through the program. You can also tweet us. The details are in the comment section that our wonderful technical team are attending to. Let's do an introduction. So today we're talking about how do you see African value systems and principles as critical to your organization. Joining me to have this conversation, which is going to be a very robust one, Lusanda Msevi. Let me start with one of our panelists. Lusanda Msevi is a community development advocate focused on transitioning to a low carbon economy. She is pursuing a Bachelor in Community Development at the University of the Western Cape, formerly a financial administrator at Nozikamo Recycling, and I hope I said that correctly. If I didn't, I'm going to attempt it again. And Nozikamo Recycling. She promoted recycling and climate change initiatives. Lusanda has strong skills in project management, environmental awareness, and sustainable business practices. She has held roles such as Assistant Project Coordinator at YDEI Africa, Vice Chair at Motherwell Community and EnviroHub, and Managing Director at CYD. Additionally, she has experience in graphic design and creative direction through various freelance projects. And we welcome Lusanda virtual roundtable. Next up, Stephen Mensah, Executive Director, Toronto Youth Cabinet. He serves as the Executive Director at the Toronto Youth Cabinet, advocating tirelessly for a more equitable and youth-friendly city. He's representing over 623,000 young Torontonians. Yes. Under his leadership, the TYC has led initiatives addressing community safety and youth unemployment, securing an additional $15 million for youth programs and establishing 5 new youth hubs in Toronto. Stephen's dedication to social justice extends beyond city borders, influencing policy changes impacting Ontario's 2 million students, including ensuring free menstrual products in schools, securing over $150 million in student mental health funding, and more. Recognized as one of Toronto's rising stars by Toronto Life magazine, Stephen continues to inspire change for a more youth-friendly society, and we welcome you, Stephen, to our roundtable. Caroline Sakwa, Head of Gender and Inclusion at Shining Hope Communities, Kenya. She is an expert with over 15 years of experience, leads the Gender Inclusion and Diversity Department at SHOPCO, focusing on gender equality and social inclusion in Eastern and Southern Africa. Now, Caroline has a strong background in stakeholder management. She's organized the first national gender-based violence conference in Kenya, holds an MBA from the University of Nairobi, and a BA from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Caroline is passionate about empowering marginalized communities. She is known for her strategic thinking and excellent communication skills, and we are looking forward to having that conversation with you, Caroline. Welcome to the roundtable. Finally, homegrown South African, Masetsebale Kiane, Managing Director of Agape Youth Movement. He leads a social innovation nonprofit, which we've just introduced, previously worked as a development advisor at GIZ, managing projects for the Department of Basic Education and the South African Police Service. He is a UNESCO Commission member and chaired the Social Cohesion Pillar for South Africa's National Plan on Gender-Based Violence. Maset Sebale is an alumnus of UJ with degrees in communication science, pursuing a master's in strategic leadership and social policy at UCT. Through his organization, Agape Youth Movement, he supports leadership and safe learning environments in school, and he is a social entrepreneur and student of decoloniality. I'm losing my words today, but certainly my roundtable guests won't be losing their words. Maset Sebale, Caroline, Stephen, and Lusanda, welcome to the roundtable. Pleasure to have you all.
Thank you for having me.
We had to bring in some kind of introductory music to welcome you properly. What is any kind of entrance without some music? So there you have it. We just got to say hello to you. So Caroline, Stephen, Maset Sebale, and Lusanda, you coming from different parts of the world. Let's kick off with, we've got two questions we're focusing on today, which I want to get into, but I would also like to hear from you and the thought processes that are going around in your mind, having heard the first part of the program. Let's start with you, Stephen. You are in Canada at the moment, so early morning for you. Give us some insight into your organization, just a quick round of introductions, and what are you hoping for today's conversation to achieve?
Absolutely. And thank you to the previous speakers. It was really insightful. Had to step in and out to do the other things, but I'm glad and privileged to hear what I heard and to be in this space with all of you. So as mentioned, my name is Stephen Mensah. I'm the Executive Director of the Toronto Youth Cabinet here in the City of Toronto. So the Toronto Youth Cabinet is the city's official youth advocacy body. So in my role, I have the mandate of advocating on behalf of Toronto's over 600,000 youth who live, work, and go to school in this city. And we were established in 1998 by our city council with that mandate to advocate on behalf of youth, as well as to encourage young people to become more civically engaged and engaged in policy development and municipal politics, but also politics at all levels of government. So that's a bit about the Toronto Youth Cabinet. And I guess what I'm hoping to really gain from this conversation is, I think, really try to hear some of those similarities but while also similar challenges and differences, and also when we speak to the way we advocate. I know I'm always looking for different ways to advocate, as well as when we talk about youth agency and what it means to give young people that safe space, but also provide them with that platform where their voices could be meaningfully heard. And so I'm really curious to pick other people's brains and hear other people's perspectives as to how they've been able to achieve that.
Wonderful. Stephen, thank you for joining us, and I appreciate that wonderful intro. I'm keen to hear the conversation that's going to happen going forward. Lusanda, welcome. Tell us more about what you've been doing. I know that you were in transit, en route. Where are you heading, and what do you want to achieve from today's conversation?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on such a wonderful platform. It is with gratitude that I get to greet everyone who has joined us online. My name is Lusanda Msevi, as I've been introduced. I'm just coming back from doing a workshop. So I was facilitating a workshop on capacitating youth for climate action. So when I was traveling, I was actually traveling so that I could find just, some peace and be able to be audible when it's time for me to talk. So I'm the founder of Catwalk Youth Development Agency. At most, we just aim to nurture and capacitate young people so that they can be drivers of change in their communities. I'm very much grounded on Ubuntu, so that's one of our values. And then me being a climate activist has also then helped me into channeling climate activism and sharing that with other young people. I believe so much in knowledge sharing, and I believe that everyone needs to be on board if we aim to develop our country sustainably and do so in a manner that is inclusive. And also, I believe that the youth have so much energy and so much to give. So everything that we do at CYDA is basically to capacitate those young people, bring the information right to them, help them have those skills so that they can be able to take on the issues that we have in society. Okay, so for me, when I joined in, I heard Batupile, which I am very much interested in learning more about. Also, I loved the mentioning of Ubuntu because I believe that essentially us as a people, we can achieve so much if we're grounded by understanding our interdependentness. Like we need each other to get through in all that is happening in the world, within the changes in climate, within the development, within economy, within all the spaces. If the people can get into a space of a collaborative nature and an openness to being united as one, we can achieve so much. So for me, I took that as something from the keynote speaker.
Lisandra, thank you so much. Caroline, I'm going to move on to you, introductions and something you want to take away or add to the conversation today.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Caroline Sakwa. I'm the head of gender and inclusion at Shining Hope for Communities. In short, it's called SHOFCO. SHOFCO, we are celebrating 20 years of existence here in Kenya. We run programs in informal settlements for young people, and we do a lot of multi-sectorial approach to working with young people. We intertwine issues of gender and gender-based violence. We intertwine issues of economic and livelihood empowerment, financial inclusions, issues of youth voice and agency for young people. And my interest today is basically to share our experience on how we amplify voices for young people in the Kenyan context. And as one takeaway that I've learned from the keynote speaker is when she talked about Ubuntu, I reflect on the other aspect of Ujamaa, which is an East African socialism kind of aspect of how we create togetherness in terms of creating cooperatives that are promoting economics. How do we work together? How do we live together? How do we support each other to become fully empowered and economically empowered for us to be able to have a voice, and also allowing that space for young people to thrive as young people and make changes in our communities. Yeah, thank you so much.
Make changes in our communities. Caroline, thank you so much. Something you are certainly doing, Masitevale, with your organization. An introduction and what your organization focuses on, particularly in the light of the topic we're talking about. And then what would you like to achieve from today's conversation?
So our organization's focus is on multi-sectorial approach to issues
Caroline,
of young
I'm
people.
so sorry. I know we went to Masitevale. I'm going to come back to you to finish what your organization does. If I can allow Masitevale to answer, and I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Masitevale.
Thank you very much, Nazri. You're doing an incredible job, and we feel very much safe in your hands. Good afternoon and good morning to other colleagues in another part of the world. My name is Matsetsebale Waratliane, but you can call me Tsetse so that you don't have to spend the whole evening trying to say the whole name. I'm the managing director at Agape Youth Movement. It's a non-profit company based in South Africa that works very closely with the South African government to support and strengthen systems that aim to enhance youth agency, focusing on school-going age youth. I'm quite happy that today in this session we have someone. You know, we as young people in South Africa, we tend to speak about the youth of 1976 as if they don't live among us. And I'm quite happy that we have Mam Geraldine Muleketi here that is able to say I was 16 years old at that time. And we were the ones representing the voice of young people against the oppressive system of the time. And in essence, what Agape does, it is to support government to ensure that youth development agency or youth agency in communities and in schools, it is strengthened. Around 1976 in South Africa, the likes of Muleketi, they had, you know, senior youth such as Abu Nkgopotsitiro, which were the mentors to these young people. And in essence, this is what we provide to the South African context. We activate the youth agency of young people on topics such as school-related GBV. Ubuntu is one of the topics that we focus on. Our young people spend most of their time online. How are they safe? How do they lead their peers in schools? I mean, there's a structure in every public school where young people are able to sit on the school governing body. How do we activate their role in decision-making processes? And for me, this afternoon and evening, I'd like to get from this conversation, let's have a dialogue. Let us challenge each other's perspectives and realities. I'm quite happy that we have young people from around the world, and we will be sharing our realities and drawing from each other experiences that could harness what we are doing locally in our countries, and also to build networks. Next time, I would like to find myself sitting with Stephen and Caroline and also Lusanda, having conversations as leaders, as young leaders of the world, on where is it that we want to take the agenda of Afrocentric approaches to systems transformation. Thank you very much, Nasri.
Setse, thank you so much for that comprehensive view in a very succinct manner. We are looking at the Afrocentric approach to systems transformation. So we started at a very high level. We've now filtered that down into dialogue too, from looking at the youth agency perspective. In this particular village conversation, I see half of my arm is missing, which looks quite weird. So just ignore that for a moment. But the question we're posing to our young leaders on the call, Stephen, Caroline, Lusanda, Setse, how do you see African value systems and principles as critical to your work? Now, while you have work and you have organizations, you also have yourself and the personal journeys or stories that you have undergone that gave rise, gave purpose, gave passion and inspiration to the work that you are currently doing. I want to talk from the perspective also of how you find yourselves currently from a continental and a global perspective, because we have one identity, but we're also connecting with people of the same diaspora across different regions and different spaces and places. And Stephen, I'll start with you. You're based in Canada, Ghanaian roots. You're leading Toronto Youth Cabinet. Tell us a little bit about that journey, and I want to then tie it back to a South African approach. So take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So I was privileged to live in Ghana for 3 years. I finished my part of my elementary and high school there, and then I came back to Canada. So I was born here, went to Ghana for 3 years, and then I came back to Canada.
Got it. Got it. Apologies if I may have mixed that up, but thank you for clarifying.
You said it great. And so I think when I look at some of the values and my experiences in Ghana, that really fueled and led me to do the work I'm doing here today. And I've always said to meet my friends and peers and colleagues here, that much of the work that you see me doing today, but much of my value system stemmed from my experiences in Ghana, and where I was able to deepen my cultural roots, but also deepen and get a better understanding of my familial backgrounds and that of my mom and my dad, and some of the values that they were instilled upon, that they've obviously instilled in me. But it's one thing to be trained up as a child here in Canada, but also go back home and be able to see it for yourself, and see the way that my parents and folks were able to live. So I think of the words compassion, empathy, respect, which are obviously all values maybe that are embedded in the word Ubuntu, that I've used to lead my advocacy. Many of the work that I've been able to do here in Canada are not necessarily issues that I myself face. When I think of my work to push for free menstrual products across Ontario schools to address gender equity, I don't identify as someone who menstruates, but nonetheless, that compassion for my fellow human, that sense of respect and just looking out for one another, was one of the big reasons that prompted me to push for something of that sort as well. So I think when it comes back to, when I trace back all the work I've been able to do here, it always traces back to my roots in Ghana, and some of the values that I was instilled, that continue to lead me to do the great work I'm doing here today.
The great work that you're doing here today, which encompasses the values we talked around, empathy, respect, compassion, and kindness is key value to that. Kindness is difficult to define sometimes in the world, but you're talking about those values, and African values are very much that. They centered around community, kindness, sharing, and a sense of wholeness. Caroline, in the Kenyan perspective, and from your perspective of starting to grow into the work that you're doing, are those some of the same values, or what additional values led you to start doing the work? You're on mute, Caroline. We need to hear everything you're saying. I want to hear this.
Yes, it's the same kind of values, just like what my colleague has said. But I'll also have more addition in terms of within the Kenyan context. There's an aspect of cultural education. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of training for young people whereby we are linked to the historical figures within our countries, like our president, former president, and the elders in our communities, and understanding the basic African societies and in terms of cultural heritage and how it can instill some of this sense of pride, sense of responsibility within our communities. And also from these figures, we're able to learn the aspect of even within young people, how we can form movements that can create change in our own communities. And in terms of when we look at thousands of young people in the African context, they are always affected by political violence and other aspects. And we live the aspect of their strength in terms of most of the time when you do analysis of young people's behavior, we always see that their behaviors is destructive. But with the cultural awareness and civic education and how young people are trained on how to influence policies and how to take part in the process formation of different issues within the country, like local governance, how they can influence specific policy, like the youth policy in Kenya and all that. So automatically that instills specific values and a growth mindset for young people to focus on issues of how they can embrace challenges, how can they create the persistent kind of attitude, and also create opportunities for them and become more creative. So all those values that we've learned from our cultural aspect and growing through a growth mindset has enabled young people to really create a lot of transformation in their own community and drive change in various aspects. Yeah.
Driving change and transformation. And I love, Caroline, that you picked on developing the growth mindset. The one thing you've struck in my mind, which I want to throw to Setse and ask the question around, you talked about cultural heritage and the training of young people in cultural heritage. To my mind, that sounds like you're in educating and capacitating young people to understand the past or the current situation that we work in, the current instruments that we have to work with in order to accept and move forward with the growth change. Setse, in our South African perspective, we have seen Fees Must Fall movement and various other movements that have come around through youth agency. At Agape, is this something that you've grappled with to also help drive a growth mindset with helping impact cultural or values within young people? Is that something that you'd like to speak around?
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
See you, hear you, all good.
Perfect. This is definitely something that we grappled with. But you know, when Mam Geraldine was speaking about the youth of 1976, there's something that we need to hone in on. The battle was a battle that was started by young people at that time, those that were in grade 8, 9, and 10, because those were the ones that the language policy, Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, was going to start with first. Those that were in grade 11 and grade 12 were not necessarily affected. And the ones that had discomfort were the young ones, and they were the ones that actually started that. So what we're celebrating in South Africa today is something that was started by people that we tend to undermine and think they don't have agency. And when we speak about what happened in universities and Fees Must Fall, it is an agency that is inspired by what happened in South Africa, but that was started by children and adolescents. And in essence, what we battled with in Agape is, how do we strengthen the agency that exists in our schools, which is in essence stepping back to where South Africa comes from. We tend to think that the struggle in South Africa, in Africa, is something that is to be led by young people that are over the age of 18. And you know, at the time in 1976 and the events leading up to that, they had Abutsietsi Mashinini, they had Abongkhoputsitiru, that gave these young people ideologies for them to know who they are, to have resilience, to have self-confidence, which are in essence values of Ubuntu. Because when you have to deal with an oppressive system, the first thing that you need to defend is your humanity, and that is the basis from which you fight. And these are the values that we as Africans, I believe, we've all been brought up with, that through youth agency, we then look at defending. So our process is, how do you then activate young people at that age so that we don't lose it, because it looks like we might be losing it. Children also have a voice, adolescents also have a voice. Our schools are engulfed by so much violence. The age of skyrocketing pregnancies by learners is getting younger and younger, and the numbers are getting higher. They are the ones that can tackle these challenges. We give them the tools, we give them the confidence, and they then do it. And in essence, that is how we come in. Let me give it back to you before I take the whole night.
Isn't that it really though? You give anyone with promise, potential, the right tools, the environment in which to operate, and watch them fly. And that really is it, the confidence that you can do it and the right tools in order to do it. And this goes for everyone. We talked around young people, and particularly the early childhood development phase, going into schools, then going to adolescence, and then young adults. This under running Catwalk Youth Development. You've heard your other three colleagues speak around the core concept of values driving change in their organization, or driving a growth mindset, as Caroline referred to. Stephen was also talking about the values that they are able to bring to young people. Are you finding, if I can ask you the question, that social media is both a challenging and a necessary tool in order to help drive these values? And I want to bring that back to the rest of the panel, but just I want to get your starting view on that. And please unmute yourself so we hear your great answer.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, we cannot put social media on the side. There are positives, of course, and there are some negatives to it. But I believe everything, when it is, how can I say it? When it is kept in a way that we, like etiquette, everything is meant to have etiquette. It's meant to have a set of rules of how we use it for positive change. Because as a founder of CYDA, I engage most of my youth ambassadors through social media. And many of the information that we share it through social media. So in the use of it in that manner, it is positive, but then also it has now become very essential to young people to feel heard, to a point that if we're not at home giving them the space, or rather listening to them in a manner that makes them feel heard and seen, they go onto social media and they cry even louder on social media, which then we see that the many issues that society is facing, they show up on social media. So social media is then, I believe it's not going anywhere, as we are revolutionizing, and we are also saying yes to AI, yes to technology, yes to this kind of improvement. But I believe that if we monitor it to such an extent where we monitor the information that is put on social media, or rather the way that social media is used, then we can have positive, let's say, we can have positive input and outputs. I'm so sorry about that. There's a small face trying to also get my attention, but essentially,
it's all good. It's all good. Bring them onto the call. We want it all.
Yes. But this is wonderful. I am truly inspired. I'm listening into all the speakers, and I'm like, we are also grounded in the spirit of being giving and open to giving. And I think that is essential in people who want to make a difference. If you want to create sustainable communities, if you want to create leadership in people, if you want to create strong leaders, you, the person that is facilitating, remember, you're not imposing anything, you are facilitating that process of change. You need to be open. You need to be so open to learning also from them. So I'm truly inspired by my panel of speakers as I'm listening in.
Sandra, you remind me of, I was, many years ago, I was 30 at the time. So it was many, many years ago. I was on a flight going back to Durban and going through a very tough time when I used to be an employee. and this woman just happened to be sitting next to me. I was in so much of pain. I just thought I'd open up to her. I said to her, I'm having this trouble at work. And she said, the one thing I'll tell you is you need to have a teachable spirit. Now, as a 30-year-old who thinks that they've made it, the next generation of life, but also coming with multiple identities that we do. I'm a hijabi, I'm an Indian Muslim woman, South African, proudly South African, proudly African. So many identities, and you grow into that. You remind me a lot of the concepts of what it means to have values, to be teachable, kind, empathetic, and to understand, to have cultural appreciation, which is what I have heard from all of our panelists. Now, Stephen, I'll come back to you from the context of being intercontinental, but also working from what would be deemed a Eurocentric perspective. How has that helped shape what you do in terms of the work and responding to the rest of your panelists and maintaining strength in identity? Because I know going to different spaces can have an impact on trying to understand the depth and the passion and purpose of work. How would you respond to that?
I heard, sorry, it glitched for a bit. The first part of the question was, so it said something about Eurocentrism.
Yeah, in the Eurocentric approach, and can you hear me now better?
Yeah, I can hear you better.
100%. So you work intercontinentally, coming from a Ghanaian perspective, you move back to Canada, you're doing work from the perspective of fostering respect on being an African youth, being in the diaspora, understanding that. The Eurocentric approach is ever present, whether we're watching Netflix, we're going onto Coursera, we're using Google, whatever it may be. How do you grapple with that? How do you manage that in response to your other colleagues who may be centered in the regions that are already their home?
Thankfully, one thing that we always talk about Toronto is that it's very multicultural. But beyond,
and if I can ask you that question, it's just an interesting understanding to observe all that is happening.
I think for me, it's really important for me to ground myself in community, especially wherever I find myself. So whether be in my academics or just in the work that I'm doing at the Toronto Youth Cabinet, and I put this on my team too. We need to go where the people are, but most importantly, we need to go where our equity deserving and most vulnerable young people are. Be rooted in their community, ensure that we're engaging with them, ensure that we're listening to them. Someone spoke to the piece of learning from them and listening to them and helping it inform the work that we do. And I think for me, my approach to, remove myself from the Eurocentrism, despite being always surrounded by it, this stems from the fact that I'm constantly rooting myself in community and surrounding myself and ensuring that my advocacy and my learnings are from those who are diverse and from those who have that lived experience. I think that's a key thing, is removing my own experience, removing that of those who are most privileged, who are amongst our youth population, and centering it on those young people who are disadvantaged, who are most vulnerable, but who have so much contributions to provide when we talk about systems transformation and making change. I always say to in the atmosphere I'm in, my mandate is to advocate on behalf of all of Toronto's young people, but not all of Toronto's young people need me. Those who are most privileged, who are well off, that's not the perspective I want to listen to. I want to listen to the perspective of those who are oftentimes not heard, but have so much.
Stephen, I also think you have an added responsibility, because it's like being, no matter what identities we hold, whether they come from an ethnic perspective, language perspective, race perspective, whenever you're in a different environment, you always have an added responsibility, doubly so, to show up and to tell the story and to keep the narrative. So I suppose everyone has an added responsibility, no matter where we are. Setse, do you feel the same way? Caroline, I'm going to come to you shortly. So don't feel like I have forgotten you. I have not forgotten you. Setse, I just want to ask you, is that responsibility the same but framed differently from a South African perspective? What are the responsibilities you have as a youth agent?
The responsibility that I believe I have is to ensure that my peers and I understand the national question.
And what is the national question for South Africans right now, for young South Africans?
Yeah, how do we deal with the issues of unemployment, inequality, and poverty? These are some of the challenges that could be barriers to us reaching our full potential as the future of this country. I mean, the generation of 1976 and beyond, they had systems that they had to tackle. And they deliberately, came out knowing what is at stake, putting their lives on the line, and fought those systems. But I think we as young people of today, we have the responsibility to understand how to, steer this vessel, to fly this aircraft that those that came before us fought so hard for. And I think that is the first point of departure. How do we as young people on the continent in South Africa, with the challenges that are there, it's mostly young people that are facing high levels of unemployment. How do we, as those that were privileged to even go to universities and understand how to run institutions, be the ones that start jobs? The environment is conducive, the ground is fertile. And I think we have that responsibility to ensure that the small portion of young people that might have been exposed and have certain opportunities.
Yeah. I see Stephen's hand. I see your hand, Stephen. I just want Setse to finish up and I'll come to you.
So basically it's that. But it is one of the great African leaders, Captain Thomas Sankara, who once said, a soldier with no ideological training is a potential criminal. There's plenty.
The potential is a potential criminal. Hold on that thought, because I want to understand the link between values approach and a knowledge approach. If I have a values approach, I have a knowledge approach. Caroline, I want to know what the national conversation for young people in Kenya is. But before I do, Stephen, what's your thought?
No, I just wanted to speak to the part of responsibility, because I think that's something that's so important to myself is, I look at those who are older than me and those who have come before me and the responsibility that they have to support myself. But even me, myself, being a young person, I always say that, and not only just being a young person, but being a young person who has my role, but also being a Black youth who has my role, which is something very rare, I know, over here. And so looking at the responsibility that I carry to my young Black youth, to my niece and nephews, to ensure that they have all the opportunities they need to thrive and succeed in the city of Toronto and just Canada at large, but also the responsibility to create those safe spaces for them to also be able to contribute and participate, especially when we talk about Black, Indigenous young people who, when we talk about political systems and honestly, education systems, every system, society, they're always marginalized and neglected. I feel like I have such a huge, not burden, because it's a burden that I'm willing to carry and the responsibility that I gladly carry to ensure that they have better opportunities. And I think lastly, one quote that comes to mind is the mindset of, as I climb, I'm lifting others with me. I lift as I climb, as I continue to rise, really bringing other people along to also make sure that they're supported and they're able to succeed. So I just wanted to add that point.
Thank you, Stephen, for the addition. I'm looking at Caroline, not Caroline, I'm looking at you. And we want to know the national conversation that's happening in Kenya right now. You have a distinct responsibility, leading Shining Hope for Communities, learning and inclusion systems impact. That's what you were going to talk around. But gender and inclusion, and gender is also a very, it's a very unique, but it's also a very fragile concept sometimes. Very fragile because there's so much going on. It has so many definitions in the world at this point. Please tell us how you are responding to this.
So currently in Kenya, the national conversation, of course, as my colleagues have said, other speakers, is about employment, lack of jobs for young people in Kenya. Yeah. And one of the major barriers to employment for young people it's also linked to issues of gender and inclusions. Like in terms of gender, when you look at gender in totality, the issues of gender, the fact of being a male or a female can also perpetuate some discrimination aspect when it comes to employment issues and issues of inclusivity, like people living with disability or special groups also they are discriminated against jobs and all that. So the main conversation is around creating jobs and just linking young people to jobs, and lack of jobs, opportunity, and barriers to employment is a big conversation within Kenya. And the aspect of there's high rate of gender-based violence in Kenya. There's issues of femicide in Kenya. Even during the World International Women's Day, we were on the streets talking about femicide cases in Kenya, like they are risen so highly, and asking the government, what are they doing to prevent women from being killed or men from being killed? So by the end of the day, the issues around employment that are intertwined within gender issues and inclusion issues are really the top of priority in terms of conversation in the different sectors within the Kenyan conversation, national conversations. Yeah. And how we are responding to it. Of course, we're amplifying the voices of young people in these spaces, creating space for young people to speak out, creating space for young people to create movements like what the young people are doing in South Africa, and make noise and tell and talk to the government and the political leaders on ensuring that there's proper budgeting in terms of responding to these kind of issues that the young people are raising. And also,
are you creating spaces, Caroline? Are you creating spaces for people to speak, young people to speak out because they can't find the right space, or is there fear of speaking out?
They in Kenya, like there's so much transition in terms of spaces and growth. There's so much spaces to speak up. Like we're just finding young people creating even more and more spaces to speak up. There's no fear in speaking out in Kenya. Like there's so much freedom in terms of speaking out. So there's so much spaces in Kenya, be it online, be it community spaces, be it government and governmental spaces. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. Again, everything we've talked about, and Holden, if I'm correct, has given a comment in the chat, which I will refer to shortly. Thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. But everything I hear from our very esteemed panelists leading young change comes back to values. That's why I wanted to explore the idea around, is it a values approach or a knowledge approach? What I have found, and I know we referred to for all our audience members, if you're tuning in via Facebook Live, YouTube Live, wherever you may be, please drop your comments or questions into the comment section. And also here on the call, put it into the notes as Holden has done, which we will refer to shortly. But it's always around, I have always had a question. As a 41-year-old woman who is kind of leaving what I could call myself youth at this point. But man, we're still rocking the youth spirit. So in celebration of rocking the youth spirit in Youth Month, I will try to understand the question around youth currently in spaces that we come from volatile history. South Africa is one example. Volatile histories, we have fought for our freedoms, and the fight for freedom comes with the responsibility. That is why I'm asking our young people on the call around whether it's a values-based approach. I'm an elder millennial, Holden. Oh God, yes, thank you. Thank you, Lord. So we go back to values-based approach or knowledge-based approach, because are we, in your work, are you having to deal with educating and capacitating youth around having a respect for the past and moving forward with a growth mindset, or still grappling with an anger that is generational of what has happened in the past and approaching it now? And that would then hinder what I think is a growth mindset. Are these two different scenarios that you are grappling with? I want to come to you, but let me first go to Holden's comment, which is, if ontology is the philosophical field revolving around the study of the nature of reality, all that is or exists, and Afrocentricity as the structural methodology that engenders a culturally appropriate conceptualization of Africana reality, and to address Eurocentric conceptions requires that we study and dismantle the racist epistemology of knowledge production. Let me say it better. Racist epistemology of knowledge production. It's so interesting that when you don't know something, you will try to explain it from the very subjective lens that you have. If you have never experienced it, if you don't have a desire to experience it, if you don't want to question it even. And those different phases that people have will determine how they ultimately produce something or produce a view to the world. Lysanda, I know you are going through load shedding. I might have a crystal ball to understand that, but if you are, you are still very much with us. Please unmute and tell us more about this conversation that we're having. Values-based approach to knowledge-based approach, or capacitation with people in your organization. Tell us more.
It's just my lighting that is a bit it's a bit dimmed because I'm in
it's not load shedding, guys. I'm so sorry.
Not load shedding, not this time around. we're still a bit off. The elections were just last week. We still have a break.
It's true. It's very true. For everyone listening in from every other country, we have had our elections in South Africa. We know we are famous for load shedding, but ESCOM has been more power to ESCOM, or maybe the other way around. Visanda, please go on.
Yes, no, we are quite fortunate with the energy currently, and we're grateful for it. But at most, I would say, so you had this question of are we facing a youth that is still angered by the past, right? And deciding to take a step back in response to that, or are we having a youth that is saying, okay, the past has happened. What do we do to create our future, right? So our approach within CYDA has been, we are so fortunate that we work with creative minded people who are willing to learn, people who are open in mind, people who consider themselves pavers and creators of the future. So truly what we've been using the knowledge base that is already there. And what we do is we try our best to bring in information to feed into that so that young people are more aware in how they approach the situations that we are facing, socioeconomic, socio-environmental, everything. So they approach it in a more informed manner, because there's also that when you feel like you are pushed against a corner, you retaliate in a manner that can be bad. You could create more damage and there could be more loss. And that is not good for anyone. Or there's an approach that says, okay, here we are now. Yes, 1976 happened then. We were not there. Yes, all those other things happened and now we're a bit behind. Okay, here we are now. We have the capacity to learn. We have the capacity to share knowledge. We have the capacity and the energy to create change. So how we've been focusing truly at developing our communities, because our focus has been around youth that is based here in Nelson Mandela Bay, in like activating them to be change makers within their communities. So it's all been about sharing information, and then we leave it all up to them. And what you see is that when people are activated, when people are inspired, when people feel informed and understand the base from which they are taking action, they are more, it becomes more impactful. So I think to just draw back on what Stephen had said, we're privileged to have the courage to help to bring others on and say, I want to be here. I want to lift others. I want to help others be change makers. And I'm doing my best to raise my voice so that they can also shout their voices at the back. I think with that, it's a great privilege. And truly, I believe young people have solutions. I believe in the innovation and creativity of young people. And if we give them the platforms, they always outshine, they always do their best. I'll just go back to today as a reflection of my day too. We were focusing on an approach of community-led climate action. And we just asked the audience, some of them, it was their first time being introduced to the topic of climate change. And in as broad as the topic is, the feedback that we got back from them in the solutions that they have in mind was just mind-blowing. It basically showed us what happens when you give people a platform to say, hey, here's the information. Here's what we know. With this information that you now have, what change do you think could happen? And are you going to go forward in creating it? Or should we just stay mad at what has happened in the past? And I think the youth
stay mad at what has happened in the past.
Yes.
Definitely not, which is why for inspiring, incredibly wonderful, amazing young people.
Yes.
I have to say young people. I'm not sure where I fall in that bracket anymore. Young people are doing this incredible job. We have to get to the elders' reflection. So, Setse, Stephen, Caroline, Visanda, I'll start with you, Stephen. The closing thoughts around the question we started out with was, how do you see African value systems and principles as critical to your work? I'm going to rephrase that question. What African value do you want to continue imparting through your work, Stephen?
Empathy. It has to be empathy. I'm really big on, am I new or can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. All good.
Okay, I thought I felt it. Okay, perfect. Yeah, it has to go back to empathy for me. It has to be rooted in empathy due to the fact that not all the issues, especially when we're in political leadership and when we're in positions of power, it's not every issue that was going to come to our table that we have faced or that we're affected by or anyone that we know is affected by. But I think having that mindset and love and compassion for your human being, fellow human being, to have the mindset, regardless of who, if I'm facing it or anyone I know is facing it. I care, but since I care for my fellow human being, I'm gonna make sure that I support them. I'm gonna make sure that they have the tools to succeed. I think empathy is key for me.
Empathy is key, certainly.
And I just did have to touch that last question very quickly about value. Is it value based or knowledge? And I wrote notes because I didn't want to forget. But I put that for me, it's principled value advocacy with rigorous knowledge application. I think for me, it's a dual approach, of youth empowerment, of civic engagement. Also meshed with the fact that in all the advocacy work we do, it needs to be evidence based. To ensure that we can actually put forward tangible policies for tangible.
It certainly needs to be evidence-based. It's like going into a corporate environment, and I have heard many business owners say, we hire for attitude, not for skill, because skill can be easily trained, but attitude is everything. And so thank you for that point. And rounding up, what would be an answer to that question? I'm glad you addressed that question. Caroline, an African value that you would hope to continue with your work?
One of them, which is critical, is collective responsibility. Like in the African context, like a child belongs to the society. Like that's a value that if we continue with it, like we'll be able to ensure that there's a lot of resilience and adaptability in everything that we do. And it will definitely be a value-based approach to what drives me to do what I do and how do I influence other people and what drives them to do what they do, and they do it to their level best. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Collective responsibility. We've got empathy, collective responsibility. Setse, what do we have from you?
It's Ubuntu. It's oneness. It's love. Ubuntu says, I am because you are because I am, we are one. If you suffer, I suffer. If I suffer, you suffer. And I think that is the basis that we are bringing in Agape in our programs. The young leaders need to understand that the challenges that they're facing, if they are addressed from a place of value, fighting for values, trying to achieve values, they would approach interventions and programming from a place of understanding and love, because knowledge-based approaches are in essence a means to an end to achieve a certain value. That's why people are even able to put their lives on the line. Now, it's very critical for us to ensure that we teach love and oneness in what we are doing, so that they understand it's not just about dealing with this thing at a surface or at a peripheral level. It is deeper than this. And if they can get that, nothing can stand in their way.
It is indeed deeper than that. Setse, thank you so much for that. Lusanda, to help us wrap up this conversation, your African value to continue in the work that you are doing. You're on mute.
Yes,
there you go.
I just noticed now, and I was trying to improvise with the light, but the value that I truly uphold personally and that we uphold, it's actually one of our values, the CYDA. It is Umuntu. We are interconnected. Everything is all connected. All life functions as one. So if we understand and if we uphold that, truly we will appreciate all the voices, we will appreciate all the ideas, we will appreciate all the expressions that are there, and we'll understand that they are all important and they all deserve to be listened to and to be acted upon. And that is, it just rounds up being a human being, exuding that love that is so open, that is uplifting, that is inspiring to other people. So truly, Ubuntu.
Thank you so much, Lusanda. Makes me realize, once again reminds me of what I know is my purpose for living. My purpose for living is upholding the dignity of others always. In whatever space I am in, wherever I am out, it's always being reminded that I am responsible to to identify and acknowledge the dignity of others, because we all have a role to play in the world. We all are essentially just human beings trying to do our best at the end of the day, no matter where we come from. So empathy, collective responsibility, and Ubuntu. That was the outcomes of the value, African value, that our young generation will use to drive the work that they do. Stephen Mensah, Caroline Sakwa, Lusanda Sibi, Masitebale, Kiane, thank you very much for joining us. You are just incredible. Just continue to do the amazing work that you're doing, and round of applause to you. I will give you a loud round of applause, but we've got virtual rounds of applause here. And I know you're going to step away from the virtual roundtable. We have been talking around youth agency and the context of African value system and how are those interconnected. So we need to have a bit of reflection now that we've had a conversation with spunky men and women who are doing these things for us on the ground. And I want to invite our elders back into the conversation, Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, who did our keynote for us, the Chancellor at Nelson Mandela University, as well as Emmanuel Melez, who is Executive Director at NABC. Thanks for joining back and understanding, listening to the young generation and what their perspective on African values are, the challenges that they face in trying to embed values and knowledge-based approaches. Some of your takeaways, we'll start with you, Dr. Geraldine. Some of the thoughts that you had listening to our young people speaking.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And it was an amazing discussion, having this village roundtable. So the first thought that came to mind is actually a thought that that originates from Ghana. And this is the Sankofu bird. The Sankofu bird flies forward, but looks backwards. And it actually reflects very much that our present and future is embedded in our past. We cannot deny the past as we deal with some of the challenges that we confront today and will deal with in the future. And this is not about anger. This is actually to a point that Caroline has raised. And Caroline spoke about the issue of resilience, but she also spoke about heritage. And she spoke about the importance of understanding your history in order that you could build on that and find solutions for today and into the future. And it's about sustainability. I also, as I deal with that particular issue, would want to draw out the issue of empathy from Stephen, where he very clearly points to the fact that even empathy is political. And you cannot divorce that from where we are at this particular point in time. And he's reflecting on evidence-based approaches and all. Also takes us back to the Sankofa bird, you know, as we look at what we're doing. The last 2 points that I'd want to deal with, but before I go there was a question that was put on the chat by Odan, where she spoke about the whole issue of what she refers to as racist epistemology and how we move away around from that. And I do want to say to Udan and the chat as a whole that at the moment at the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, we are building the Thabo Mbeki Center, which Presidential Center, which is a center that brings together thought leadership, archives of African leaders. And already we have the archives of Kenneth Kaunda. We have some of the materials from Kwame Nkrumah. We have them from various other African leaders. So it's an African center. And as we look at this African center, recent times, and Caroline would be pleased to know that, for one of the 8 domes in that center, there's a woman's dome or a woman's granary. And this granary, we had a summit that looked at how we would curate for that granary. And one of the issues that came up to the point by Udan was looking at indigenous knowledge systems and seeing how we would bring that into a play and taking into account from an African and a diaspora context, the whole issue of language and the nuances around language. And it comes to your question that you've posed to everyone. Is this about a values-based approach or a knowledge-based approach? And I actually wanted to say it may not be one. It may be let's call it a hybrid. We need both as we take this particular issue forward. But I'd like to conclude with the question of collective responsibility and Ubuntu. So to a large extent, what one has drawn out is the interrelatedness of this particular issue that we are confronting today. And stating, and I want to say this to Tsetse, that, you know, when you look at the national question, it doesn't only deal with the national problem that we're confronting in country and across the continent, but it also goes more broadly around the issue of nation and nationhood. And to a large extent, we've got to look at this very seriously, because this is what can separate us as a continent. So instead of celebrating our diversity, as was pointed in the beginning, we can get hung up on differences that's very narrowly captured through boundaries, through language, through culture. And we've got to overcome that and celebrate that. And one attempt to make that happen at the level of the African Union has been the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. But in order to give that content and life, it's got to bridge the whole issue of culture. It's got to deal with the issue of creativity. It's got to look at how we are able to build this African nationhood that spreads across the diaspora, with the diaspora being the extra state on the continent, and this will ensure that we as the African continent, and I go back to a point I make earlier, celebrate and benefit from the demographic dividend, our youth dividend, and rise as a phoenix from the ashes, and see this as part of building the African Renaissance. Thank you very much.
Building the African Renaissance and rising from the ashes. Dr. Geraldine, you talk about the African Union, and they have been running African Union Media Fellowship Program, bringing together from across the continent youth who are helping to drive the narrative through media means, using all kinds of media, paid media, digital media, print media, outdoor media, and help focus and drive that. So thank you for raising that, because you've also raised our attention to wonderful initiatives going on to capacitate youth on re-establishing the narrative that we have as Africans. Thank you so much for that reflection. I want to pull Mr. Emmanuel Sir into the conversation for your reflection from the Village Roundtable. What are some of your thoughts, Emmanuel?
Thanks, Nazarene, and I was really indeed listening with my heart and taking keynotes about these incredible 4 young leaders. In her introductory remarks, Geraldine spoke about voice, presence, and action. And I was able to witness that in the brief interaction that these 4 young leaders have done in terms of sharing. Definitely they are leading, definitely they are in the action area. Their voice and presence and leadership is felt. And that reminds me in a way, you know, when I look at young leaders and the future, I'm reminded of the quote of Robert Sobukwe when he said, let me plead with you, lovers of my Africa, to carry with you into the world the vision of a new Africa, an Africa reborn, an Africa rejuvenated, an Africa recreated, young Africa. We are the first glimmers of a new dawn. And I particularly go back and remember Robert Sobukwe at this moment, simply because in front of us, we have seen the example of this reborn, present and vibrant Africa and many in this call from the diaspora. And I think some of the things that I will try to reconnect in my reflections now is we are in interesting times. Yes, there is the youth dividend in the continent. We have in this call people like Hodan and others that are actively, trying to make the most out of the permanent forum of people of African descent around the areas of recognition, development, and justice. We have the African Union with its agenda of engaging the diaspora, the sixth region diaspora, movement, if you want. So there are a number of things that are happening at the moment that we say it's the right time for bold leadership, yeah? And I think part of linking system transformation with the issue of youth agency and youth leadership, transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's an endeavor, it's an engagement of the many, of the brave souls that plants the seeds for change medium to long term, where we're planting the seeds for generations to come. And as I said in my opening remarks, we can learn a lot from our indigenous brothers and sisters. And one of that is thinking for 7 generations. If we cannot think for 7 generations, let's think for 2 or 3 generations down the road. What I took out of the intervention of these 4 young leaders is that there are patterns of issues and challenges that are similar in the continent and the diaspora. They spoke about youth unemployment. They spoke about gender violence. They spoke about the fight against poverty. They talk about the various isms that when you think about it, these patterns are similar irrespective of boundaries, irrespective of where there are common issues and challenges for people of African descent. So the question I have of myself and everybody is, what are the patterns of solutions that we can co-create together? And I think it was Luzana who spoke about innovation and creativity. By really bringing young leaders to bring forth their innovation and creativity, all of us are better off. Years ago, when I worked with young leaders to launch the Creative Institute for Toronto Young Leaders, one of the things that we have heard repeatedly from young leaders that they want in the Leadership Institute, the concept of innovation and creativity integrated there. And many of those graduates of that institute today are doing amazing work in the sector here in Canada. The other thing that I have heard loud and clear from the various speakers is the value of being rooted in culture. When we talk about Afrocentricity and Afrocentric values, what Geraldine added to the conversation today is this concept of, Bapopile, which is an interesting thing that I invite all of us to take time to learn about that. And one of the things that I see there attached to this concept is the need to be consulted. Here in Canada, we say nothing about us without our voice and participation. Yeah? So there's a very simple concept there, but I think the invitation for me and all of us about learning more about Bapopile is we can broaden our understanding of the value systems that you have. The other thing that is very clear for me is that I've said this repeatedly in the work that we do, this concept of locus of control. Some of these leaders that we have heard from, in their own places, they are leading change. They are literally exercising their locus of control. Whether it's on gender and violence issues, whether it's on really working with young leaders, whether it's policy enabling, all these young folks recognize their locus of control. It's very important that we as adult champions and mentors, and this is another point I want to bring to the discussion, is that youth agency and youth leadership must be enabled. We must create the pathways of support, whether it's through grants and resources, mentoring, advocacy, opening doors. We must be there at the forefront as elders to really create resource and support for young leaders. And part of that, as I often say, is as elders and mentors, we must recognize in that intergenerational moment when it is important for us to get out of the way.
Get out of
Because
the
that's also a way to enable youth agency, because inadvertently, some of us stay the longest of times in our roles and positions. We have to be able to lane and be out to be able to allow these young leaders to exercise leadership. And the last comment I would make here, and it's related to NAPSI itself. NAPSI, you know, through those strategic pillars that I spoke about earlier on, we've been intentional about supporting youth leaders. We have supported youth leaders, for example, and young adult leaders to participate in influencing the process of the permanent forum of people of African descent. We have been there supporting through our smart grant making youth groups and youth organizations in their work that they're doing, our capacity building, especially in relation to recovery from COVID. For almost 4 years of our existence, we've been an active backbone organization working with the Ontario government here in Canada around the Ontario Black Youth Action Plan, supporting more than 100 organizations funded under this plan in terms of capacity building, in terms of being there advocating for resources and support. So this is central to our concept of system transformation. Our desire, as I said in terms of the opening remarks, our desire to learn with you about stretching this concept of Eurocentric system transformation to really go back to our roots and discover how Afrocentricity and Afrocentric values are going us to create a new knowledge patterns, new practices around systems transformation. I think for us at the end of the day, it's like if we were to see the results of all this, we'll see it down the road. We'll see it into the future.
We'll see it into the future, indeed, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, can you put the link? Can you share with everyone in the chat? And I know one of the colleagues will do so for NAPSI's program, so young people can just go and investigate the current programs you're running and the grants associated. We've got to wrap with the elder reflection there. I am very sorry I have to cut into that moment that you had the thought, but I would love to continue that in the breakaway sessions that we have. Emmanuel Melez, Executive Director at NAPSI, Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, who is the Chancellor at the Nelson Mandela University, and our keynote speaker for today. Thank you both for your reflections. Indeed, it wraps up the village conversation that we had with our 4 young leaders. We're going to take a break, 5 minutes, get a cup of coffee. I know I need it, but we do need a cup of coffee so that I can power up and be all good and set to be back. We're now sitting at 6:18 p.m. here in South Africa. I'm not certain of the time in our countries elsewhere that are joining us, but you should be something 18. So let's come back at around 6:20. I'm going to say 25 past 6, which is 6:25 p.m. here, and the equivalent will be whatever it is, 25 p.m. or a.m. back in your neighborhood. Okay, see you just now. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you've got your coffees settled back in nicely. We've had an amazing first two parts of our session. We had introductions, a keynote address by Dr. Geraldine Frazier-Moleketi, a village roundtable, 4 incredible young leaders, and now it's your turn to add to the conversation. We will start opening up the breakout rooms. There are 4 groups, 5 groups, with the relevant moderators of that particular breakout room. You'll be talking around different subjects. So let's head into the breakout rooms. You will hear from your moderators what you need to talk about. You will come back in 30 minutes and then we will wrap up. So let's get, I think, sorted into our breakout rooms and we will come back in around 30 minutes back into the main session with just a very high level overview of the feedback, and then we'll do a closing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Just a bit of an announcement before we head out. In your breakout, you will see a whiteboard coming up on the screen. Your first will tell you to add your notes. So as you engage, please keep your notes, write your notes down on the screen. It's just coming up now. But make sure you don't choose pen to draw. Either choose a sticky note or text so that you're able to tap and not just fiddle around the screen. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for that technical guidance. That's really great. Thank you very much.
in Scarborough. And we are a community health center providing care to our local population and also to the Black community across what we call the Greater Toronto area, which is a very large area, including the city of Toronto and surrounding municipalities. This community health center, we provide primary health care, so doctors and other allied professionals, and also we provide community services. And so we offer exercise programs, we offer food programs, we offer community dialogue programs, and what have you. And so anything to do with a person's health and well-being are offered by Taibu Community Health Center.
Excellent. No, that's great. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Phil. Maybe just to get going, I mean, what are some of the things that for you, sort of resonates in the conversation that we just had on the plenary? So are there any thoughts that jump to mind immediately? Anyone? Olawumi?
Neil?
Hi. Chingitai?
I would also like to introduce myself.
Oh, sorry. You put on the what do you call it? The camera. Because I just saw the logo there.
Oh,
sorry,
the logo. Yes, it's me. It's me. So my name is Chingitai. I am also in Quebec, South Africa. And my work is all around communication. So I provide communication support and technical support to regional projects, working with organizations like the African Union, GIZ, all these organizational developmental projects working on the continent. And so what really stood out for me was the comment about the Sankofa bird flying forward but looking back, and it being symbolic of evidence-based, approaches. So like a very simple example, which is so, an African-based example, which really speaks to my work, that really connected with me deeply, because in all of this comms work that we do, it's all about knowledge management, trying to collect and share as much knowledge on the continent so that different projects can benefit from innovation that's happening across the continent. So I definitely will take home with me this symbol of the Sankofa bird.
Thanks, Chingitai. And just so that you guys know that you will have seen some of the branding. It actually has a bird, a very colorful bird. And that idea of the Sankofa bird from Ghana was the inspiration behind this logo identity that we placed in the use of the dialogues as a series. So it's very well located in terms of that. So thanks for that, Chingitai. Olaunmi, any emerging thoughts before we get to the question? How do you feel?
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that, man. Everyone's still open in it. Basically.
Well, I think this conversation is really important in this like it's really important to me.
Just the sharing and the ideas, or is it just that we're opening up about the topic in this way?
Yes, that we are opening up about the topic this way. It's really important. It's an important conversation.
Good. And Phil, how are you feeling about the last 2.5 hours? Feels like 3 hours, yeah?
Yeah, I got to apologize. I missed a good part of the conversation because I had to step away for another internal meeting. So, but what I did hear was, some of it was new, some of it was informative. or all of it was informative, but some of it was new, some of it was stuff that we've talked about before. But I just think having this forum with folks, as diverse and far flung as folks are here is something that goes without saying is very impactful and very powerful.
Good. Yeah, look, I mean, just from my sense of contribution is just that having this idea of elders reflecting and contributing towards this sort of co-creation of insights is important for us in when we thought about this dialogue series, is that it isn't just about the contemporary challenges, but to the point that Doc Fraser Moleketi was sharing, was that much of our current malaise is very rooted in our history, and understanding what learnings we can derive from that and how it can inform our future is a very important act, and an affirming one, because with all the advances, we now have more scope to talk openly about these things, which, to your point, Oluwumi, is that the conversation isn't just important, is that it's done in a context where we can build on what we've learned from the past and the things that allows us to do more progressive initiatives and or reaching more people and within the network. So for me, that is that we have the freedom to share these ideas without fear of recrimination, and that is what the previous generation didn't have enough of, and that's a key thing that we need to affirm, these hard-won gains, and especially pass that on to the next generation, so that they are constant, that they are mindful of how this has come to pass. So I'll just stop there for now. Otherwise, I'll talk myself into the last hour. This is more about the group work. So if you have any thoughts around how can we make this a little bit more deepening the engagement and the impact. Any ideas or thoughts around that? I think, Alomimi, you said that the topic is important, and so more of dialogue is needed, because not everybody may have access to this platform at this point in time. So more access to dialogue is one way of doing so. Phil, any other thoughts?
No, I support and agree with that. So definitely more opportunities like this to have more fulsome dialogue and understanding what's going on in other jurisdictions as well, for sure.
So other perspectives, regions. I like the Caroline's input, and also Stephen's reflections of his time in Ghana as formative in terms of his journey. So the sharing is an important one. Chengetai, any thoughts from your side around how do we deepen this this platform through these dialogues?
I definitely think that we should start to pick out like themes, emerging themes, cross-cutting themes, or experiences, and hone in on like deepening our understanding of those particular issues, so that from there we can start to develop, like, I don't want to use, terms like working groups or, but they're always beneficial. You create like additional platforms where people can share on specific topics, their approaches or kind of practices to address specific issues, or, you know, other creative things like, who knows, cross-Atlantic, you know, events. We could, you know, have something in person. I think the sky's the limit when you start to cluster the issues or the perspectives. Then you see what the emerging themes are. Then you get to draw down from that and see what people can actually tackle. So yeah, I think.
Would that more or less sum up what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was one of the suggestions that came from the previous dialogue on leadership as well. Was that people felt that you know, we accept that having digital conversations is one way of connecting with people, but that there is a need for ensuring that we oh, what am I doing now? That we do have a space for face-to-face engagement around solutioning some of these themes and topics that are valued by participants. So that's that. Anything else, Phil, that you can think of that can be added to deepening this engagement?
Nothing for me, but thanks for asking.
Okay. Okay. Olawumi, any additional thoughts that come to mind?
I think I would say industry partnerships and curriculum engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say curriculum development, you mean around the conversation, or is it around curriculum development in education?
I mean curriculum enhancements. So there could be continuous review and continuous review and updates in their curricula to incorporate engaging trends and technologies, I believe.
So it's not necessarily limited to curriculum enhancement in the educational space. It's generally
yeah,
how we learn from these dialogues. Yeah. So dialogues as a curriculum, dialogues, engagement as a curriculum, to enhance, you know, sort of. So it is a more continuing learning and
learning, yeah.
That, yeah. Trends and developments. So that's more of a also being to use the other word that they used is being data led and story led, and what is it that we are seeing come to pass as a result of these conversations, the practical outcomes. Okay, partnerships to consider, support for dialogues and exchanges. Okay. Good. So yeah, so I don't want to take too much more, but if there's no other additional thoughts, I think what one can do is to I just want to make sure that I do the technology bit here, is to finish this part. Unless there's a last comment that you have, Olawumi and Phil. If there isn't, Chengetai, is there any questions on your side?
No, I'm happy.
Okay.
None for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, thanks, Phil. Thanks, guys, for these inputs. So what will happen now is that we will take this information and we'll collate them as part of the body of feedback, and then what we will do is to share that in the project report that will be circulated, or at least a summary of this project report that will be circulated in the next week or two, so that you have a recording of this meeting, of the event, the dialogue itself, and then you will also have a copy of the summative notes from this as part of our what we call a knowledge management process, that will result in a compilation of not just this dialogue but also the previous one and the one that's coming up in July. And that one, that one will focus specifically on the conversation around partnerships and philanthropy, that is more transformational as opposed to the transactional types of engagement that we are used to seeing from the philanthropic community as a general rule of thumb. So thank you very much. It's 18:50. I'm going to stop presenting now here, and I am just now. Let me just find out from Mpo. Does he close it? Okay. So what will happen now is Mpo will close this group, and that we will then return to the plenary room, where we'll do the wrap up. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks,
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. So there's a button at the bottom right called Leave Room. You guys can leave that, and it will take you into the general plenary. Okay.
Recording in progress.
answer that one as a real life history. Music fades out and you just deal with the matter at hand. Sounds like a song, but we won't go into that right now. If you can hear me clearly, please give me a thumbs up. My headset has sadly not lasted the session, so I have to go old school and just talk to the screen. But thank you so much for getting to the breakout sessions and giving your points of view, and really fascinating, insightful discussion coming out. I wish we could go on and on. We have to, however, close it. And to help me to do that, because I know that we wanted to have reflections on the breakout rooms. There were many interesting thoughts coming out. There were notes that were captured, so I know that the technical team have done a round trip of going to every room, grabbing the sticky notes from the whiteboard, and that those reflections and recommendations will be shared accordingly. Now, to help me to finalize this session for today, this dialogue, I would like to ask you to use agency.
No, let's do alphabetical, Alan.
I don't like that because at school, yeah, I know at school I was always at a disadvantage because if they say take alphabetical, my name begins with an A and my last name begins with a B. So I was always in the front of the queue to answer the math questions, which made me very nervous. But be that as it may, I wanna just take the opportunity. I'm aware that we are going slightly over time as these discussions that we have often do, and sometimes we allow for that space. So thank you very much for your patience as well. Maybe just to say that I had a conversation with someone who was responsible for facilitating a long-term dialogue process on a very critical matter in South Africa post-apartheid. And I asked him 30 years after this dialogue process took place, I asked him if you so in the room were lots of people representing different sectors, from business to government to mining industry, etc., etc. And I asked him, if you had to have young people's voice in the room, what would have changed? And he said, in hindsight, he would have wanted to have young people in the room because they give a different perspective. They give their own unique experience, which is different to others, and that experience and that perspective that they had needs to be valued. And I remember this because I think it's something that we always need to be conscious of. We sometimes think about consulting young people as the last box that we tick when we are engaging them, when in fact we should consider them, or young people, as critical voices and a critical part, especially when it comes to social change and systems transformation. So the dialogue today reminds me again of the importance of creating a space for young people to be part of critical discussions going forward. So that's the one thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that I just noted a comment from, and forgive me if I get the name wrong, I think it's Zilla, who was one of the participants. She might still be on. Is like when we faced a challenge, a technical challenge earlier, it's like her comment was, "We will not be deterred. We must move on." And that sort of encapsulates my experience of working with young people, and that mindset that we all should have is, despite our greatest challenges, despite the barriers that are on the way, despite those that make conversations like this difficult to have, that challenge some of these things, we should not be deterred and we should move ahead. So thank you for that comment. I would like to just give a few thanks. I think It's always tricky to say most importantly, but this will be very difficult to have without participants in the room that have made their time and their effort to join us today. So thank you so much for those organizations on the continent, in Canada, wherever you may find yourselves. Thank you for making the time. For the speakers, for Dr. Fraser Moleketi, for Professor Beki, for all of those that have contributed, particularly the young people. It's been fantastic, in some cases, reacquainting with young people, but also learning from people like Stephen, from Caroline, from Pratsetse, from Lusanda as well. Thank you so much for your expertise and the passion in which you take on your task, and your sense of responsibility that you hold, which I think is critical. Canrad, our institutional partner as well, thank you so much for your input and for your help in shaping these dialogues, and as well as the Nelson Mandela University for the interest and importance that you've placed on this. To the Ontario Trillion Foundation as well for seeing the value in investing in collaboration, and for your efforts as well as making this happen. There are many of those behind the scene, Concept Africa, Chengatai, Mpo, Marco, and the rest of the team that's behind all of this to make it happen. Thank you so much to CS Innovations. Last time I did the vote of thanks and I didn't say thank you to Neil. Neil and your team. Big thanks as well for your leadership in this. The Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, which is the organization that I'm privileged to work for, led by Emmanuel, but also the colleagues there. I like to mention Jonathan, Emmanuel, of course, Denise, Rochelle Faith, Rosemary, those that have helped continue to shape and refine this. Sarah and Nafisa were particularly involved in making this happen. So to all of my wonderful colleagues who have the privilege to work with and learn from every day, big thanks. And then to Nazarene for holding the space for us. I know that we could speak about this topic for the entire day and then more after that. But thank you very much. We have a wonderful thing in South Africa, is that if we forget to mention someone or to say something, we just say all protocols observed, and that covers you. So all protocols observed. We look forward to the next part of our journey, and I would like Neil just to let you know what happens from here and what the next month or so looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And yeah, I get to have the last word. I'm not sure if that's a blessing because it can go very long. But just to say that I was tasked by Dr. Fraser Moleketi to please send her apologies that she had to unfortunately finish off a little bit earlier than what was planned, but that she thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and the insights and looks forward to being involved. And as she shared with me that tomorrow she's having a meeting with the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and certainly for her, what she has experienced in the feedback and the engagement tonight, for us, very important to share that with others as well, engaged in social transformation and systems transformation work. So that was the one task that I was given, to convey that. And then the second one is that the next dialogue will happen in the last week. Just about the 23rd, 24th. Looking at the date now, the 24th of July. And the topic is relevant because in the breakout rooms, it was clear that one of the key things is talking about what partnerships mean in making meaning of this work and deepening its impact. So partnerships that will look at engagement of the philanthropic industry and how we can move from transactional to transformative outcomes through the work that we are all involved in. So that's what's coming up. And then just my last soliloquy is really just a reflection on what Dr. Fraser Moleketi was sharing in that, in the cynicism of all the work that we do, that it's easy to give up, that we must recommit. And there's a quote that I often use in articulating this particular sort of orientation, this activist disposition. It was written in 1910 and delivered at the Sorbonne University in Paris by the then former president of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, when he led a speech called "The Citizen in the Republic," and his most famous quotation from that is the following: "The man in the arena, or the woman, as I like to paraphrase, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out the strong man's stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who actually is in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, but there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself or herself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of higher achievement, and who at the worst, if he or she fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that this place is not, shall never be with those that cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." And with those words, may that encourage all of us to get back in the arena and to do the good deeds in spite of the risks and the challenges. And with that, Alan, I yield back to Nazreen to say thank you to everybody for your participation, and looking forward to your participation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, Neil, for very interesting insights, but also from your organization perspectives, because as we know, I'm just going back here to my notes, the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, Ontario Trillium Foundation, Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy at NMU, and CS Business Innovations have worked diligently to put together this series of dialogues around systems transformation and Afrocentric perspective with varying themes. You've heard the theme that's coming up for the next dialogue next month with Neil. Alan has given us insights and done a wonderful vote of thanks. Thank you so much for recognizing everybody. And the team at the back end, the technical team, worked hard to put people in breakout rooms, get the notes, deal with hacks as we must. Cybersecurity is top of mind for everybody these days. And I thank you all very much for being an excellent audience. We wouldn't have had the session without you, as it was. So we'll see you in the next session, and stay sharp and just be kind to one another. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.